Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, The Medieval Reader. So it's been a few weeks since last I made a video on Orlando Furioso by Ariosto, but I wanted to resume my series on this epic romance that was written in the 16th century. This is a really long work. I have read about 375 pages, and that's only a little past the 50% mark, at least according to my Kindle. So this is a really long work. I thought it would take me a month, but it has taken a lot longer. Also, I was presenting at a conference, and now I'm working on term papers, so it's taking even longer than it would otherwise. Still, I've been really enjoying this work. The author really tries to not make this work boring. That's why there are so many different storylines happening at the very same time. You just can't be bored. If you're bored by one thing that's happening, suddenly the author will change scenes and you'll go into another storyline and then return to the initial one. So I'm never bored. What is hard for me sometimes, though, is to keep up with all of the different storylines and to remember which character is in love with which character, or which character is fighting which character. And sometimes, for example, a character like Rodomonte is in conflict with 2 or 3 different knights. That gets confusing. Also figuring out who's on the side of Charlemagne and who's on the side of Agramante, the Saracen king. That's also hard to figure out. It doesn't help that I never read the first book, Orlando Innamorato. However, I've been told that the first book is not that good, and that it's really the sequel written by Ariosto that is the most famous. So I don't feel too bad about not having read the first book. And at times the author reminds us of what we may have forgotten about a certain character. At one point he reminds us of Angelica. He said, "Do you remember Angelica? Because we left Angelica when she ran away from Orlando, and we really don't get to see her again for a while. When we do hear about her again, she is in love and actually marries Medoro, who is just this random Saracen knight. Orlando, who is madly in love with Angelica, goes absolutely crazy. I mean, madly. I mean, or Furioso is in the title of the work. He loses it. And he just goes on this rampage, killing hundreds of people, wiping out their village. He can't believe that Angelica has left him when in fact she was never in love with him in the first place. So when we do see Angelica again, it's not about Angelica, it's about Orlando. And in some ways, it's always been about Orlando or Rinaldo or whoever else is in love with Angelica. It's never really about Angelica herself and what she wants, which is none of those guys. She loves only Medoro, and we don't really see their relationship. We only hear about it. We see some evidence of their relationship on the trees in the forest, where Orlando first learns that Angelica is in love with Medoro, but we don't really see them together. And I think that that's a really interesting choice on the part of the author. And this gets at one of the major themes in this work, which today we would call toxic masculinity. I think we can say that Orlando's love for Angelica is toxic. He completely loses it. He's like naked, running around, killing people. But it's not just him. There's also Rodomonte and Mandricard, who are fighting over Doralice. Again, she's just a prop in their game. There's Isabel, who is killed accidentally by Rodomonte, who is in love with her, but she doesn't, I mean, she's assaulted by him, she's kidnapped by him, and then he kills her while he is drunk. She was in love with Zerbin. So this story basically follows one male character after another who is madly in love with a woman who doesn't reciprocate the love. And then, of course, they get into fights with other knights, and sometimes these fights really get in the way of the bigger conflicts that need to be dealt with. For example, the conflict between Charlemagne and Agramante. In addition to the toxic masculinity that disrupts everything, you also have this character who I believe is a dwarf named Brunello, and he is the arch thief behind many of the conflicts that result from his stealing. He is responsible for having stolen Angelica's ring, Orlando's sword, Balizard, and also Marfisa's sword. Marfisa is, by the way, a female Saracen knight who is trying to prevent the knights from fighting with each other long enough to help defend Agramante, the Saracen king, against Charlemagne. But they just can't manage to put aside their fighting for even a moment so that they can come to the aid of Agramante, which I just think is so funny. But Marfisa's sword was also taken by Brunello, and then there's Sacripant, who I don't know very much about. I think he's some kind of a king, and his horse was stolen. So you have that side of things. Then you have these allegorical characters like Discord, who are also behind these conflicts. But really, the great foe in this poem is love. A love that leads to this toxic infatuation with women who do not reciprocate the love, leading to women's death, or in the case of Angelica, her just living her life, not really knowing what's going on, and Orlando having completely and utterly lost his mind. Which is, I think, why Orlando Furioso is often referred to as a parody. It is a parody on the epic and romance traditions. It's funny to see these knights fighting over such, what I think are quite silly, unimportant things. But there you have it. And then the last character is the author, who really is a character in the story. He inserts himself into the narrative. He will sometimes allow for male characters to go on misogynistic rants, but then he will say, oh, that's not my view. I mean, you women, at one point he says, you women, you can just skip this chapter because it's really horrible and I do not share these views. So on the one hand, he will take the side of the women, but then on the other hand, he'll say, well, I sympathize with Orlando because I have this woman whom I am in love with and I'm having difficulties with her. And so I sympathize with Orlando's insanity. So the author is really hard to pin down. And on top of that, he mentions this man named Turpin. And Turpin, I don't think he's supposed to be the Archbishop Turpin from Roland, but it's interesting his name is Turpin. He is supposedly the real author of this story. He is supposedly the person from whom we get this story. So he is the one who has first recounted the story, and now our author, Ariosto, is retelling the story. But sometimes he'll say, well, I don't really believe Turpin here. Or Turpin gives a different version of the story, but I'm not going to tell that version. Or he will say, yes, Turpin is right. I think this is very reliable. These authorial interventions really remind me of Don Quixote, which will appear at the very end of the 16th century. Cervantes's work does a very similar thing with the author intervening and telling you how he feels about the characters, but also telling you about, different source material he is using, all of that. It's very meta, and I really love that about this work. And I really like how this work is influenced by so many other works, other epics, other romances, how it subverts those tropes. And it really makes me want to read some secondary scholarship about it to see how this work was constructed. That's all I have for you today. Happy Easter to everyone who is celebrating, and I will talk to you later. Bye now.